Imagine you're 23-12, the one seed in the West with the most exciting young roster in the entire league. And you haven't even won 40 games as a franchise in a season since Durant was a Warrior, LeBron was a Cav, Kyrie was a Celtic, Chris Paul was a Rocket, and Lowry and DeMar were in Toronto. Everything looks fantastic. You have one of the most efficient and destructive offensive players in the entire league in the 114 games that he's actually played in his Warrior career, and he's still only 22 years old, a legit All-NBA and future MVP caliber player. That is until injuries hit and they became one of the worst teams in the league, on their way to finishing 10th in the conference and losing in the play-in game. And by far the biggest issue for the team moving forward is the fact that their best player can just never seem to stay on the floor. Sometimes even by his own choice. Welcome to the world of the New Orleans Pelicans, and for a team on the brink of taking their rebuild to potentially championship contending levels, having a top 15 player in the league that has averaged less than 30 games played per season for the last 4 seasons is incredibly frustrating. Especially when you consider that when he was playing for them, they were right at the top of the Western Conference. This is a sleeping giant of a contender if they can just get this guy on the floor. But the real question is that what Zion actually wants? From the moment that he was drafted with a less than excited reaction, rumors have been swirling that New Orleans wasn't exactly where Zion Williamson pictured himself as an NBA player. Famously, the Knicks had a great chance of landing the top pick and a chance at Zion, and a lot of rumors have pointed to the fact that that was by far his most preferred destination. And honestly, as his career has progressed, those rumors have never really stopped, and the relationship between player and team has been tenuous from the moment he arrived. Most notably, the entire process of his injury rehabs over the years have been very strange. It could easily have been seen as an attempt to distance himself from the team. And the real question here is, would Zion have had nearly as many issues staying on the floor if he was anywhere but New Orleans, like the Knicks perhaps? But at the moment, that doesn't really matter, because despite having played in less than 100 NBA games at the time, the Pelicans stepped up anyway and offered Zion a full max rookie extension, which of course he signed. There was always the possibility that if Zion really wanted out badly enough, he could have waited for his entire rookie contract to end and then become an unrestricted free agent, something that no modern player has ever done when they have a max contract extension offer on the table. But Zion himself was in a terrible position considering his injury history and correctly decided not to risk it. But as we all know, a contract in the NBA simply means that you're still going to be in the league. It definitely doesn't mean that you're going to fulfill that contract with the team you signed it with. Which brings us to the end of the season, where it has been speculated that Zion made the decision himself to not return to the team for the play-in game, speculation that it actually has a good amount of evidence going for it. Zion was recovering from a hamstring injury that he suffered in January and came out himself and said that physically he was ready to play, he just didn't quite feel like himself yet. This is especially surprising considering it was an elimination game and they could have had a first-round series against these suddenly vulnerable Nuggets, and given how great the Pelicans were at the beginning of the season when healthy, they would have been a terrifying 8 seed. Now granted, coming back for just one game after months of being out for a player with Zion's injury history doesn't make a ton of sense, but given the concerns about his conditioning in the past, it's fair to question if the injury being healed was the concern, or simply Zion's readiness or willingness to play. Regardless, this is certainly a unique situation. An All-NBA caliber player that plays less than 30 games a season, not normal. Seemingly never being healthy or in shape to play, not normal. Rumors constantly swirling about a player's unhappiness in a smaller market. Okay, that part makes plenty of sense, actually. Now that last part, what does that player unhappiness normally initiate? Everybody's favorite NBA topic? Trade rumors. This has the potential to be the biggest storyline this year in the NBA, and also by far the most interesting. If you had a magic wand that could make Zion healthy for 82 games a year, he might be the most valuable under 25 player in the entire league. But the fact that that magic wand doesn't exist definitely makes his value hard to define. Are we looking at a Kevin Durant level trade haul for Zion? Multiple core pieces and a ton of picks, or more like a Donovan Mitchell style deal? Or maybe even lower than that? There really is no way to tell, but one thing I can say is Zion is probably worth less to New Orleans than any of the other teams that he would like to play for. If you're a smaller market team that's in the position the Pelicans are, keeping Zion really doesn't make much sense, assuming he doesn't want to be there. He's an unbelievable player that has also been unbelievably frustrating, difficult, and distracting. At a certain point, when you have as many other options as New Orleans does, you might just have to move on. There are ways to create a championship level team in New Orleans with or without Zion, and that without part looks like it might become much more of a possibility soon. His constant lack of availability and drama has to be annoying to the other players, some of which have even said so publicly.
I could have took the easy way out and got surgery and sat and watched, but I'm not that type of person, not that type of player.
And it isn't worth submarining the entire chemistry of your team just for the 25 games a year that Zion actually manages to play. Regardless of what his actual value is, he certainly is worth a good amount to the right team. The Knicks could view him as the piece that puts them over the top towards championship contention, and Zion and MSG would be incredible. The Pelicans can get back some assets and, more importantly, continue to build around guys that actually want to be there and can actually stay on the floor. If you're the GM, you don't have the luxury of waiting around and hoping that this situation fixes itself. You don't want to be sitting at home in 2 years watching the Pelicans make the Western Conference Finals with a roster that you built. You need to make moves to win now, and that involves getting guys on the floor that are committed and healthy. Well, that's the argument, at least. It's super easy for me to stand here and say, just trade away Zion. But in reality, it could be the biggest mistake in franchise history. Because even though we don't know exactly why Zion can't stay healthy, whether it be being injury prone, lack of conditioning, unhappiness with the Pelicans, or just plain bad luck, if all those things suddenly decide to go away one day, you might have just traded away a future MVP. And why do I use that phrasing exactly? Because there's an MVP player in the league right now that played at even less games in his first 4 seasons of his career than Zion has, Joel Embiid. Embiid played just 94 games for the Sixers through 4 seasons, so Zion has nearly a 20-game lead on him. And now Embiid is one of the most dominant players in the entire league, having mostly gotten rid of any injury concerns that he may have had, and that level of player may be exactly what you're giving away if the Pelicans give up on Zion now. But that isn't quite the full story. Yes, Embiid had some injuries, but there was also a mandate by the organization to 1, make sure Embiid was 1,000% healthy after a few seasons, and 2, to lose games. Embiid could have played more at the beginning of his career, but Tankmaster Sam Hinkie wasn't ready to win games yet, so he didn't. Comparing the early careers of Embiid and Zion, while productive if you're trying to make a pro-Zion argument, doesn't tell nearly the full story. Zion has missed games because of injuries, conditioning, and possibly an unwillingness to play, while Embiid was intentionally sat down at various points at the direction of the franchise itself, in addition to some injury issues. Having said that, the point still stands. I fully believe that if Zion was healthy, he'd be an MVP caliber player. He is that good and has already shown it in his early 20s. And all of this sounds incredibly complicated, doesn't it? Injuries, trade rumors, players refusing to play, historical comparisons, but really, it's not complicated at all. It really just comes down to this. Can Zion just play? Please? I'm not entirely putting the blame for his lack of availability on him alone. Sometimes there is some bad luck involved as well as a lot of other factors, but it's very clear, as has even been pointed out by his own teammates, that he could be doing more to put himself in the best position possible to stay on the floor. And by the way, from a basketball perspective, there is no better place in the league for Zion to be than New Orleans. They have scoring, spacing, defense, veteran size, and they are a ready-made championship contender when healthy, and that should be all that matters here. That should be plenty of motivation for Zion to put in the work to be in great shape and more resistant to injuries. And if he made that decision the way that in certain aspects Embiid did at the beginning of his career, the sky would be the limit for both Zion as well as the Pelicans. Think about the number of stars across the league, young and old, that have never had the support around them that Zion has in New Orleans. The sheer amount of flexibility with both the players around him and the opportunities to continue to improve the roster. And although this might not have been his first choice when he was drafted, being sent to New Orleans is a nearly ideal circumstance for any young star as currently constructed, and he should have every reason to want to stay there, which makes all of this that much more concerning. And if that isn't what he wants, if he's just completely set on continuing his career elsewhere, then just go ahead and let the Pelicans know. As much as I'm sure they'd like to make it work with this incredibly talented group, some kind of clarity on the situation might just provide as much value as anything. This is the reality of the modern NBA. I don't think the Pelicans are naive to it. Stars want to play where they want to, and most of the time, those smaller market teams are just at the mercy of that reality. But when you have as great of a young core and as many assets as the Pelicans do, the championship level team is still very attainable, even if they do need to move on from Zion. The bottom line here is, regardless of why Zion is or isn't playing or where he would or wouldn't like to be, I just want him to be happy, healthy, and playing basketball at his best. We as fans are being robbed of an incredible young player at a time in which many of the stars that have carried the league for a decade are beginning to age out. And arguably the most fun player to watch in the entire league is sitting on the sidelines.